Look, you gotta listen to me, Cal. Your hours, they're not working. I'm telling you this for your own good.
If that old man asks one more question about the complaint log, Royce Dunbar said, low enough to sound casual, loud enough to carry, I will personally walk him out the door and tell HR he was a no-show from day one. Nobody checks temp files. Nobody ever checks. He was not looking at anyone in particular when he said it. That was the thing about Royce. He never needed to look. He just let the words sit in the air, heavy and deliberate, the way a man does when he has spent years learning that the people around him will absorb a threat without making him repeat it. If you have ever watched someone smile while they destroyed something, you already know what this story feels like. Stay with it, and if accountability matters to you, subscribe now. What's coming is bigger than one coffee shop. The man Royce was talking about was standing 6 feet away. He was not looking back. He was wiping down the espresso machine with a white cloth. Slow and even strokes, working left to right the way a person does when the motion has become so automatic that the hands move independently from the mind. His name tag said Cal, printed in the block font that Crestline Coffee issued to all temporary staff, laminated, clipped to the chest with the kind of clip that pinches through thin fabric. He was wearing a standard-issue Crestline apron in dark green over a plain gray shirt. Ordinary, unremarkable, a man in his early 50s who looked like he had been placed in this room the same way a piece of furniture gets placed. Without ceremony, without explanation, without anyone asking what it might actually be made of. He kept wiping. And then, from the far side of the counter, a voice that belonged to Imani Voss, 29 years old, 4 years at this location, the kind of employee whose hands are always moving and whose eyes catch things other people miss. Imani's voice broke through the ambient hiss of steam and grinding. "Posted policy," she said, reading from a laminated sheet tacked to the inside of the storage cabinet she had just opened. Not to anyone exactly, just reading, the way she did every morning before the rush. Florida Statute 448.102. An employer may not take retaliatory action against an employee who, she paused, tilting the laminate toward the light, who discloses information she reasonably believes to be a violation of a law, rule, or regulation, posted by order of the Florida Commission on Human Relations, effective January 2019. She closed the cabinet. Nobody responded. The espresso machine hissed again. A bus tray rattled somewhere in the back. 2 customers near the window kept talking without looking up. Cal set down the white cloth. He aligned it precisely along the edge of the machine, not folded, not bunched, just laid flat and even, the way someone lays something down when they intend to pick it back up in exactly the same condition. And from just across the service aisle, a voice, younger, male, dropping low the way voices do when a person is talking to themselves but hoping to be heard, said, "You know what? If Mr. Okafor ever actually saw what happens in this store, we would all be in a completely different situation right now." Jerome Latta, 24 years old, on shift since 5 a.m. He had not been talking to Cal. He had been talking into his coffee cup, half facing the wall. But he had been heard. Cal did not turn around. He reached for the white cloth and began folding it into thirds. Slow, methodical, each crease pressed flat with the side of his thumb. His breathing did not change. His hands did not pause. Only his eyes shifted, just slightly, just enough, to the gap between the refrigerator unit and the back wall, where a mounted camera blinked its red indicator light in steady 2-second intervals. Then Jerome said very quietly to no one, "If he ever found out what they did with the complaint emails, man, we would all be in a completely different situation." The indicator light blinked again. Cal folded the cloth one more time, set it down, and reached without hurry for his phone. 3 weeks before Royce Dunbar made his comment about walking a man out the door, Cedric Okafor had sat in a conference room on the 31st floor of Crestline Coffee's Atlanta headquarters and read a number that did not make sense. The number was this: 0. 0 formal complaints filed across the Tallahassee East Division, a cluster of 7 stores, in 14 consecutive months. This in a region that processed approximately 12,000 customer transactions per week. This from a division where anonymous survey data showed a satisfaction dip of 11 percentage points over the same period. This from a market where 3 separate area managers had received performance bonuses in the same quarter that those satisfaction scores had declined. Cedric had sat with that number for a long moment. He had started Crestline Coffee 22 years earlier with 1 location, a lease he could barely afford, and a conviction that the difference between a good coffee shop and a great one had nothing to do with the beans. It had to do with what happened between the person behind the counter and the person in front of it. Whether the person in front felt seen, whether a problem, when raised, went somewhere or disappeared. 22 years later, Crestline had 340 locations in 31 states. And somewhere between location 1 and location 340, a machine had been built that was apparently very good at making 0 look like success. He did not convene a committee. He did not commission a consulting report. He opened a browser, navigated to Crestline's own internal HR portal, the one accessible to any employee with a company login, and submitted a temporary staffing request for the Tallahassee East flagship location, effective the following Monday. He listed the applicant name as Calvin Okafor. He entered a date of birth that was accurate. He attached a resume he had prepared in 40 minutes that described a career in food service operations spanning 15 years. Nothing verifiable from the outside, nothing false on its face. Then he packed a carry-on, booked a Tuesday flight, and told his assistant he would be unreachable by phone for approximately 2 weeks. She did not ask why. In 22 years, he had done stranger things, and the outcomes had generally been good. Monday, the first full week. Tallahassee in late October was still warm enough that the ceiling fans inside Crestline's flagship ran continuously, pushing air that smelled of espresso and cinnamon syrup, and the particular coolness of tile floors recently mopped. The store occupied a corner unit in a mixed-use development 2 blocks from the Capitol. 2,000 square feet of operational space, 12 tables on the floor, a drive-through window on the east side, and a staff of 14 across 3 rotating shifts. Cedric arrived at 5:45 a.m. on his first Monday wearing jeans, clean but not new, and a plain gray long-sleeve shirt. He carried a canvas bag. His phone, the one connected to his Crestline executive account, was powered off in the inner pocket of the bag. The phone he was carrying was a secondary device registered to Calvin Okafor, Tallahassee address, prepaid. Daisy Mercer, the opening shift lead, met him at the back door. Daisy was 31, compact and efficient, with the particular tiredness of someone who had been managing people for several years on wages that did not fully reflect the effort. She looked at his paperwork, the HR system printout she'd received the previous Friday, and said, "Okay, Cal, you'll start on the floor. I'll pair you with Imani for the first few days until you get the POS rhythm." Cedric nodded, followed her inside. The back of house at Crestline, Tallahassee East, was laid out the way all Crestline back of houses were laid out. His design, or rather the design that had emerged from 12 years of iteration with the operations team, standardized in 2016 and adjusted slightly in 2021. He knew the location of the dry storage without being told. He knew which cabinet held the spare thermal paper for the receipt printer and which drawer was assigned to the shift lead's communication binder. He knew that the floor drain near the ice machine would show scale buildup after approximately 8 weeks without chemical treatment, and that the ventilation grate above the second prep station ran approximately 4 degrees cooler than spec. He did not say any of this. He followed Daisy to the apron rack, took the one she handed him, tied it correctly at the back, double knot, ends tucked, and walked to the floor station. Imani was already at the espresso bar, working through the opening calibration. She glanced at him once, assessed him the way experienced service workers assess new people, quickly, efficiently, not unkindly, and said, "You been on La Marzocco before?" He said he had worked on similar equipment. She showed him the calibration routine anyway, which was the right thing to do, and he performed it back to her in the correct sequence, which seemed to settle something in her posture. She stopped explaining and started just working alongside him, which was an even better sign. The morning rush came at 7:15 and ran hot until 8:40. Cedric worked the bar while Imani managed the register, and he did not make mistakes, not on the drinks, not on the timing, not on the handoff protocol. But he was slow, deliberately so. Slow enough to seem like a man still finding his footing, but not so slow as to create a problem. The art of appearing unremarkable, he had learned long before he built anything, was knowing exactly how much competence to show and exactly how much to hold back. At 8:50, during the brief valley between the morning rush and the mid-morning wave, Cedric wiped down the espresso bar in the left-to-right pattern he would repeat every shift. He set the cloth down flat, aligned it with the edge. He looked at the steam wand pressure gauge, reading 1.2 bar when the operational spec was 1.1, and made a small notation in the pocket notebook he carried. Not a Crestline notebook, his own. Small, dark blue, the kind with graph paper inside. Imani noticed the notebook, said nothing, but she noticed. Jerome Latta came in at 9, starting his mid-shift, and introduced himself with the cheerful brevity of someone who does not invest much in first impressions. He was young enough that his uncertainty about most things still sat close to the surface, but old enough to have developed specific, strong opinions about the things he had decided to care about. One of those things, Cedric would learn over the next several days, was the coffee itself. Jerome knew his ratios, his extraction times, his bloom sequences. He cared about the product with the particular intensity of someone who has not yet been in a job long enough to have that care worn away. The other thing Jerome cared about, less openly but no less intensely, was fairness. He spoke about it in fragments, in the way people speak about things that have cost them something, dropping references into the margins of other conversations. A customer complaint that went nowhere. A schedule change that seemed connected to a coworker having asked a question. A raise that had been promised in February and not materialized by October. Cedric listened. He did not take notes in Jerome's presence. He filed things internally, the way he had always filed things, in the orderly architecture of a mind that had spent decades building systems, and then learning exactly which parts of systems could be quietly corrupted without showing it in the headline numbers. By Wednesday of the first week, Cedric had mapped 3 structural problems that would not appear in any divisional report. The first was the espresso machine temperature. It was running consistently at 93 degrees Celsius on the group head when the extraction spec, his spec, published in the 2021 operational manual, called for 91. The result was slight over-extraction across every drink made on that machine, a bitterness that hovered just below the threshold most customers would consciously identify, but that contributed over time to the dull, vaguely disappointed feeling people associate with a coffee shop that is not quite as good as they remember it being. The second was the complaint log. Every Crestline location was required, by company policy, by his policy, to maintain a digital log of all customer complaints, however minor, entered into the Crestline ops system within 24 hours of receipt. The log was visible to regional management. The purpose was simple. Patterns that do not show up in satisfaction surveys show up in complaint logs, because a complaint log captures the specific, the named, the particular. A satisfaction survey captures the general feeling. The specific is almost always more useful. At Tallahassee East, the complaint log had 18 entries over 14 months. 18. For a store processing 12,000 weekly transactions. Cedric knew, because he had been watching, that the store received approximately 3 to 5 customer complaints per week. Verbal complaints, handwritten notes left at the register, complaints relayed through Daisy during closing. He had seen at least 4 in his first 3 days alone. None of them were in the log. The third problem was Royce Dunbar. Royce arrived on Tuesday of the first week, mid-morning, wearing the Crestline manager polo in the Navy version that indicated shift supervisor rank. He was broad across the shoulders, unhurried in his movements, and possessed of the specific confidence that belongs to people who have held informal authority long enough that they have stopped distinguishing between what they are permitted to do and what they simply do. He did a circuit of the floor, exchanged words with Daisy in a tone that was pleasant on the surface and directive underneath, and then stood at the end of the counter for approximately 8 minutes, watching the staff work. He watched Imani. He watched Jerome. He watched Cal. He did not approach Cal that first day. He approached the coffee bar, poured himself a cup from the batch brew, free, not rung up, not noted anywhere, and left. On Wednesday, Royce returned, and this time he did approach. He stood at the edge of the service area, arms crossed, and said, to the general air near where Cedric was restocking the cup sleeves, "Temp staff stays front of counter. Storage access is for permanent employees." Cedric looked up. He had, 5 minutes earlier, gone briefly into the storage area to note the date markings on the milk crates. The dates were not rotated correctly, a minor but meaningful food safety concern. "I was checking rotation dates on the dairy stock," he said. "The front labels were off by—" "I didn't ask what you were doing," Royce said. "I said temp staff stays front of counter." Cedric looked at him for a moment, not confrontationally, not with submission, with the particular quality of attention that a person gives when they are deciding whether a conversation is worth having and arriving at a conclusion. "Understood," he said. He turned back to the cup sleeves. He finished restocking them, aligning each sleeve in the correct orientation. He made a notation in his pocket notebook afterward. Not about Royce, not yet. About the milk rotation, the specific dates, the specific crate numbers. That evening, from his rented room 2 miles from the store, Cedric powered on his executive phone for the first time in 3 days and sent a single email to his head of IT security. The subject line read, "Corporate Email Filter Audit, Tallahassee East Division." The body read, "Pull all automated filter logs for incoming messages to executive addresses, January through October current year. Specifically, any rule applied to route, delay, or suppress messages originating from Tallahassee East zip codes. I need the raw log, not a summary. Do not discuss with anyone in the chain of command below my level." He powered the phone off again. Then he opened his own notebook to a fresh page and wrote, at the top, "What does a 14-month zero look like from the inside?" He underlined it once. Thursday of the first week, Imani was 10 minutes into her opening checklist when she pulled open the storage cabinet for the compliance binder, the one that held the laminated policy postings, the food handler certifications, the occupancy notice, and found that the Florida Statute 448.102 posting was new. Not new as in recently issued, new as in recently reread. The laminate had a smudge in the lower right corner that had not been there the day before. She stood with the cabinet open for a moment. Then she closed it, picked up her pen, and resumed the checklist. Cedric had not touched the posting. He had simply stood close enough to read it in full on his first morning, and Imani had watched him do it without registering, consciously, that it was anything more than a new employee orienting himself. The subconscious registration, the slight reassessment of who this man might be, happened somewhere lower, somewhere that did not express itself in words yet. What it expressed itself in was this. The next time Imani pulled out her own small notebook, the one she had been keeping since her second year at the store, narrow-ruled, dark green, she wrote the date and beneath it, the initials CO. She did not know why she wrote them. She told herself it was because she had read his name tag, and the abbreviation had lodged somewhere in her mind. That was the explanation she gave herself. She would not arrive at the other explanation for another 9 days. The first escalation with Royce came on a Friday afternoon, end of the second week. Cedric had been watching the complaint process carefully, trying to understand not just whether complaints were being logged, they were not, but how the system of non-logging was maintained. It was not chaos, it was not negligence. It was a system, a parallel system, running underneath the official one, with its own logic and its own enforcers. The mechanism was this: complaints that arrived verbally were handled at the counter by whoever received them, typically with a free drink or a refund, and then let go. Complaints that arrived in writing, on comment cards, on the small feedback forms near the sugar station, were collected by Royce or by Daisy and carried to the back office. What happened to them in the back office, Cedric had not yet been able to confirm directly. But he had noted that the recycling bin in the back office, which he could see from the service corridor when the office door was open, contained a higher density of small paper forms than any store recycling bin he had encountered in 22 years. On Friday afternoon, a woman in her 60s arrived at the counter with a comment card in her hand, handwritten in careful block letters. She asked Daisy politely whether someone could confirm that the complaint had been entered into the system. She had left a card 2 months prior about an accessibility issue with the drive-thru and had never received any response. Daisy's face did the things Cedric had learned to watch for in this store: a brief internal negotiation, visible only in the slight tightening around the eyes, between what she believed was right and what she knew was expected of her. She took the card. She said she would make sure it was entered. Royce appeared at the back office doorway 30 seconds later. He had been in the back. He had heard the exchange, and he crossed the floor with the particular speed of someone whose instincts have been triggered before his conscious reasoning has fully engaged. "Miss," he said to the woman, in a tone that was warm and final simultaneously, "I can help you directly. We have a guest services line," and he quoted a number that Cedric recognized as the General Customer Relations Hotline, which routed to a call center in Phoenix, which categorized incoming calls and generated a weekly summary report, which was then filtered at the regional level before it reached anyone with the authority to act on it. The woman thanked him. She left. Royce picked up the comment card from where Daisy had set it on the counter. He looked at it for a moment. His thumb moved across the handwriting, the careful block letters, the 2-month-old date noted in the top corner. Then he folded it once and carried it to the back. Daisy watched him go. She did not say anything. She turned to the next customer. Cedric had been wiping down the bar. He had watched all of it: the woman's arrival, the number Royce quoted, the fold of the card, the direction of Royce's walk. He turned back to the espresso machine. He pressed his fingertip briefly against the temperature gauge. 93 degrees again. He wrote nothing in the notebook. Not yet. Not where anyone could see, but he counted. In his head, very precisely, that was the 8th complaint he had directly observed in 2 weeks. 14 months of the same pace would produce, at minimum, 200 complaints. 200 that should exist in a log somewhere, and did not. The math was not ambiguous. The second escalation came from a direction Cedric had anticipated less directly. On Monday of the 3rd week, Felix Aldridge arrived. Felix was Crestline's regional compliance officer for the Southeast Division, the person whose job was to ensure that all stores within the division adhered to the company's own operational policies, labor regulations, and documentation requirements. He was 43, methodical, with the energy of a man who had decided early in his career that precision was a form of authority and had been refining that precision ever since. He carried a tablet and a printed checklist and wore the Crestline corporate navy blazer that indicated divisional staff rather than store staff. He arrived at 10 a.m. without advance notice to the floor staff, which was standard for compliance visits. He greeted Daisy at the entrance, showed his credentials, and began moving through his checklist. Cedric watched from the bar. Felix was thorough. He checked certification postings, temperature logs, staff training records, product rotation. He asked Daisy for access to the complaint log. Daisy pulled it up on the Crestline Ops tablet and handed it to him. 18 entries in 14 months. Felix looked at the number. He made a notation on his tablet. He did not comment on it to Daisy. He moved on to the next item on his checklist. Cedric set down the portafilter he had been holding and walked with the natural, unhurried pace of a man going to refill the napkin dispenser to a position approximately 4 feet from where Felix was working. He began restocking the napkin dispenser, which required no particular concentration, and waited. After a moment, without looking up from the tablet, Felix said, "You're the new temp?" "Yes," Cedric said. "How long you been here?" 2 weeks. Felix made another notation. Then, still not looking up, "You aware temp staff don't have access to operational documentation under Employee Handbook Section 4.3? The handbook. His handbook. Approved and distributed in the 2021 operational overhaul after 18 months of drafting with the legal and HR teams. Cedric knew Section 4.3 the way he knew the layout of the storage room. Not because he had studied it recently, but because he had lived inside the decision-making that produced it. Section 4.3 restricted access to certain internal financial and personnel records. Those were the documents it covered. It said nothing about complaint logs. Complaint logs were specifically designated as internally accessible to any staff member under Section 7.1, the transparency provisions, which had been added precisely because Cedric had wanted frontline staff to be able to see whether complaints they observed were being documented. He said, "I think Section 4.3 covers financial and personnel documentation. The complaint log falls under Section 7.1, staff visibility." Felix stopped writing. He looked up from the tablet for the first time. His expression was not angry. It was more like the expression of a man who has just encountered an unexpected texture in a place where he expected a smooth surface. "Where did you read Section 7.1? He said. "The employee portal," Cedric said. "I review the handbook sections that apply to my work area. Is that a problem?" Felix looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "I'll note that for the record," and returned to his checklist. Daisy, who had been standing nearby managing the morning restock, caught Cedric's eye for a fraction of a second. Her expression was not readable exactly, but it was not nothing. Cedric went back to the napkin dispenser. He finished restocking it. He aligned the napkins in the correct orientation. He returned to the bar. From across the room, Felix continued his inspection, moving through the checklist at the same methodical pace. But something in the quality of his attention had shifted. He made 2 additional notations in the section he was completing. He spent a longer than usual time in the back office. When he left, 40 minutes later, he passed through the service corridor without looking at Cedric. What he did, once outside the store, was dial a number from his cell phone and speak for approximately 4 minutes in the parking lot. Cedric could see him through the window, not hear him, just see the shape of a conversation that was not casual, not warm, and not brief in the way of social exchanges. He noted the time, 10:47 a.m. He wrote nothing. Simone Larue arrived on Wednesday. She was regional director. Cedric's hire, originally, years ago, back when the Southeast Division was half its current size, and Simone had been the most operationally precise candidate in a strong field. She was 46, impeccably presented, and possessed of the particular social intelligence that allowed her to maintain control of a room without ever appearing to exert pressure. She ran meetings that felt like collaborations and produced outcomes she had determined in advance. She managed up with the instincts of a diplomat and managed down with the instincts of a general. And the gap between those 2 registers was not something most people in the organization had ever clearly articulated, because Simone was excellent at keeping the gap invisible. She walked into the store at 9 a.m. wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a tote bag that contained, Cedric strongly suspected, a tablet, a folder of printed materials, and possibly a secondary phone. She greeted Daisy warmly, by name, with the specific warmth of someone who has learned that Daisy's goodwill is worth cultivating. She looked at Jerome with the pleasant neutrality of someone who finds Jerome broadly acceptable. She looked at Imani with the subtly cooler quality of someone who finds Imani, specifically, worth monitoring. She looked at Cedric, Cal, with the brief, evaluative glance that senior staff give to new people they have decided are not relevant yet, and moved on. At 9:30, she convened what she called a quick team touch base in the back of house, which was not a formal meeting, no agenda distributed, no minutes taken, but functioned as one. She spoke about the Q3 results for the division, which were strong. She framed them in the language of collective effort. What this team has built, the progress we've made together, using the inclusive pronoun with the fluency of someone who understood that ownership of an outcome and credit for an outcome are different things, and that conflating them in a team setting was one of the more effective tools available. She acknowledged Daisy's management of the recent staffing transition. She acknowledged Jerome's product scores from the monthly mystery shopper audit, which were genuinely excellent, in which she mentioned because Jerome visibly needed it and because people who feel seen are statistically less likely to become problems. She mentioned, with the lightest possible touch, that the Tallahassee East location had shown some interesting patterns in the recent compliance review, and that she wanted to support the team in addressing any friction points before they became visible at the regional level. The phrase friction points appeared twice. The phrase before they became visible appeared once. Neither was explained. Neither needed to be. The construction did what it was designed to do, which was to imply the existence of a threat without locating it specifically enough for anyone to dispute or name. Jerome, standing near the back wall, shifted his weight slightly when she said it the second time. Imani did not shift. She stood with her notepad pressed to her chest. She always carried it during store meetings, a habit that had begun as a way of seeming prepared and had gradually become a habit of actually being prepared. And she looked at Simone with the specific quality of attention Cedric had begun to recognize in her. Not hostility, something closer to watchfulness. The watchfulness of a person who has learned, through experience, that what is said in a meeting and what is decided in a meeting are frequently two different things. After the meeting, Simone pulled Daisy aside. A short conversation conducted quietly near the storage room entrance. Cedric was at the bar, close enough to catch fragments, documentation practices, and staffing roster, and once, the temp. He did not adjust his position to catch more. He stayed where he was and continued working, but he registered the words. Afterward, Simone moved through the store for approximately 40 minutes, observing, speaking briefly with individual staff members in the warm and conclusive tone she used for people she wanted to feel acknowledged, without being actually empowered. When she reached the bar, she looked at Cedric with the second glance she had withheld at the opening. "You're the temp? Cal?" "That's right," he said. "How are you finding the work?" "Good," he said. "Consistent." She waited, the practiced pause of someone who has learned that people fill silence with more than they intend to. He did not fill it. "Great," she said, and moved on. Royce's escalation from words to something nearer the edge of physical came in the third week, on a Tuesday, and it began, as the meaningful incidents almost always begin, with something small. Cedric had been photographing the compliance postings on the internal wall of the service corridor. Not with his corporate phone, with a secondary device. The photos were for his own documentation. Date, condition, content, the slight yellowing of the Florida statute posting that suggested it had been posted for more than 2 years without refresh, meaning the specific subparagraph text may have been superseded by subsequent amendment. He intended to verify the current statutory language against the posted version. It was the kind of detail that should be caught in a routine compliance review and had not been. Royce came around the corner from the back office at speed, not running, but moving with the compressed efficiency of a man whose reaction time has been sharpened by years of catching people in minor violations, and stopped. He looked at the phone in Cedric's hand. He looked at the wall. His face moved through something. Not quite rage, because rage was too exposed for Royce, but the hot, compressed version of it that he had learned to channel into authority. "What are you doing?" he said. "Noting the posting dates," Cedric said. "Some of these may be out of compliance with the current statute." "Put the phone away." "I'm documenting a potential regulatory—" Royce stepped forward. Not close enough to make contact. He was too practiced for that, too aware of what contact meant on camera. But close enough that the physical fact of his size, 6'2" and broad through the chest, became a statement in itself. His hand came toward the phone. Not grabbing, not striking, a motion that could be described later as reaching for clarification, and the edge of his palm caught Cedric's forearm. Light contact, deniable. Cedric stepped back. One step, exactly. He did not raise his hands. He did not move toward Royce. He looked at the camera mounted at the corridor junction, the one with the steady red light, the one that was operational, and then back at Royce. "I'd like that noted," Cedric said quietly. "The physical contact. The time is 10:22 a.m. Royce's jaw tightened. He held the position for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, "Get back on the floor." Cedric went. He did not look back. He walked to the bar, tied his apron correctly, double knot, ends tucked, and resumed his station. His hands were completely steady. His face showed nothing that the security camera above the bar, had anyone been watching it in real time, would have characterized as distress. In the pocket notebook later, Tuesday, 10:22 a.m., physical contact, forearm, service corridor. Camera ref, junction unit, east corridor. No witnesses visible, but camera operational. He underlined camera operational. The Nadine Cross call happened the next afternoon. Nadine was Crestline's regional HR director, the person responsible for everything from hiring protocols to disciplinary documentation to the specific administrative language used when a complaint about a staff member was filed, or, more relevantly, not filed. She operated from the divisional office in Atlanta, but spent several days each month in the field. She was 51, careful, and very good at the particular HR skill of making a conversation feel like support while it functioned as assessment. She called the store at 2:15 p.m. and asked to speak with Daisy. Cedric was in earshot of the counter when the call came in. He heard Daisy say, Yes, I understand. No, I don't think there's been any. I mean, he's new, he asks a lot of questions, but..." And then a pause, and then Daisy's voice dropping lower, turned toward the wall. He moved away. He gave her the privacy she seemed to want from the conversation, because pressure was not what he was here to apply to Daisy. Daisy was not a problem. Daisy was a person caught in a machine that was using her the way machines use people, efficiently, without gratitude, and without concern for what the work cost her. 20 minutes after the call ended, Daisy found Imani in the back of house, changing out a syrup container. She spoke quickly, quietly, her voice carrying the compressed urgency of someone transmitting a warning under time pressure. "HR is asking about the temp," she said, "about whether he's been accessing things he shouldn't. She wants me to document anything unusual." Imani looked at her. "Unusual like what?" "Like if he asked you questions about how we handle complaints, about the log." Imani was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Has he? He asked me once, early on, just about where the log was kept." Imani turned back to the syrup container. "That's not unusual," she said. "That's orientation." Daisy exhaled. "I know. I just wanted you to know they're paying attention." Imani nodded. She finished the syrup rotation. She wrote the date and time on the container label, in her careful handwriting, and pressed the label flat. She did not say what she was thinking, which was, they were already paying attention before he got here. They have been paying attention to this store for a long time, and paying attention has not helped anyone. That same evening, Imani sat at a corner table after her shift, not quite ready to leave. She had her notebook open, the small, dark green one, and she was looking at the initials she had written on the second page. C.O. The ones she had written on the fourth day, for no reason she had fully articulated to herself. She thought about what she knew. She thought about the 14 months of complaints she had watched disappear. She thought about the coworker 2 years ago who had filed a formal complaint through the internal HR system and received within a week a schedule change that made her commute impossible, and who had resigned by the end of the month. She thought about the comment cards. She thought about the drive-through accessibility complaint that the woman in her 60s had referenced. 2 months, no response. She thought about her own folder. The folder was at home. It had been at home for 3 weeks, which was how long she had been carrying the specific weight of having assembled information that she did not know what to do with. It contained a printout of 41 complaint entries she had personally documented in a private spreadsheet. Dates, descriptions, customer names where provided, outcomes, and the notation, "not entered in Crestline Ops," beside every single one. It contained screenshots, taken carefully in the early morning before anyone arrived, from the Crestline Ops terminal, of the official log showing 18 entries. It contained a printed copy of an internal email she had seen on Daisy's screen for 3 seconds during a moment when Daisy had stepped away from her workstation. A message from Simone Larue to Royce Dunbar, subject line visible, body partially visible, enough to read, "Anything that touches protected class language goes to me first." She had not been able to read the rest, but she had remembered the subject line. She had written it down. She looked at the name in her notebook, C.O. She thought about the way he had stood after Royce's comment the first morning, the stillness of him, the left-to-right strokes of the cloth, the pocket notebook and the precise notation, the way he had cited Section 7.1 to Felix Aldridge without hesitation and without heat, the way a person cites something they genuinely know rather than something they are reaching for. She thought about the way Daisy had said the initials. The HR director wanted to know about the temp. Cal, C, Okafor. The name tag read Cal. The last name on the intake paperwork she had seen clipped to the schedule board for 1 day before Daisy had moved it to the office had read Okafor. C.O. She sat with that for a moment. Then she closed the notebook, picked up her bag, and left the store. She told herself she was going home. She told herself she was not going to do anything with the folder tonight. She told herself that on the walk home, and through dinner, and twice more before she went to sleep. The following morning, Thursday the 3rd week, 7:45 a.m., before the rush, Imani arrived early. She set her bag under the counter. She put on her apron. She poured herself a half cup of batch brew and stood at the end of the bar, holding it with both hands the way she did when she was working something out. Cedric arrived at 7:51, 4 minutes before his shift start. He came through the back entrance, hung his bag, and began the opening calibration on the espresso machine without being asked. He worked in the same left-to-right sequence he had used every morning for 3 weeks. Imani watched him for a moment. Then she said, "You have a minute?" He looked over at her. He set down the calibration tool. "I have something I want to show you," she said. "I don't know if it matters. I don't know who to give it to." She paused. "But I've been watching you, and you seem like the kind of person who understands what's supposed to happen when something goes wrong." He waited. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, Manila, worn at the edges from being carried back and forth, for 3 weeks without being opened in front of anyone. "This is every complaint I log myself," she said. "The ones that didn't go into the system. I've been keeping track since last year. I don't know if it's useful. I don't know if anyone with authority would even care." She held the folder out. He took it. He held it in both hands for a moment without opening it. Then he looked at her, not with the evaluative glance of a manager, not with the careful neutrality of a covert observer, but with something more direct, something that looked, Imani thought, like someone who had been waiting to be given permission to be exactly who he was. He opened the folder. The first page was a spreadsheet. 41 entries, dates, descriptions, outcomes. The notation, "not entered in Crestline Ops," beside every one. The second page was a screenshot of the official log, 18 entries. The third page was a handwritten note in Imani's careful block print. Email from S. Larue to R. Dunbar. Subject, complaint volume, keep it clean. Body, partial. Anything that touches protected class language goes to me first. Do not. The sentence ended there. She had not seen the rest. Cedric read it. He turned to the next page. He read everything in the folder. He took approximately 7 minutes. His face did not change significantly. His hands held the papers steadily. When he reached the last page, he closed the folder. He held it for a moment. Then he looked at Imani. "Thank you," he said. "I'm going to take care of this." Imani waited for him to say more. He did not. She searched his face for the qualifier, for the "but," for the particular hedge that people use when they mean well, but cannot actually follow through. She did not find it. From across the store, the back door swung open, and Jerome came in, unwrapping a scarf, 12 minutes early, talking to himself in the mild running commentary he maintained when he thought no one was listening. "Honestly, if whoever owns this company ever walked into this store, actually walked in here, actually saw what Royce does to a complaint form." He stopped when he saw Imani and Cal standing close, the folder between them. He looked at the folder. He looked at Cal. He said, as if arriving at a conclusion that had been forming for some time, "Man, I don't know who you are, but I hope you're somebody." Cedric looked at him. Jerome held up both hands. "I'm just saying what I'm saying," he said, and went to hang up his bag. Imani was still watching Cedric. She said, very quietly, "Who are you?" He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he reached into the canvas bag he carried, the one that was always with him, that he always kept closed and always hung on the specific hook near the back entrance. And he pulled out a phone. Not the secondary phone, a different one. He powered it on. He looked at the screen. He read something. He said, "The email filter log just came in from Atlanta." He said it the way a person says a thing that is confirming what they already knew. Then he looked at Imani directly and said, "I need you to stay here. I need Jerome to stay here. I need Daisy to not call Royce for the next 20 minutes. A pause. "Can you do that?" Imani stared at him. "Cal," she said, "what is going on?" He reached into the canvas bag again. He removed a small, laminated card, a corporate ID card, the kind with a photo and a color stripe and a title block, and set it on the counter, face up, between them. The photo was him, older than the temp in the apron, or maybe just less deliberately ordinary. The name beneath the photo read, Cedric Okafor. Beneath that, in the title block, Chief Executive Officer, Crestline Coffee Corporation. Imani looked at the card. She looked at him. She looked at the card again. In the 27 seconds of silence that followed, the espresso machine cycled through its automated maintenance flush. The sound was ordinary and familiar and entirely surreal. Jerome came back from the bag hooks, apron half-tied, and stopped. He looked at the card on the counter. He looked at Cedric. He said, "Holy cow!" The sound he made after that was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath. Something between the two. the involuntary noise a person makes when the structure of a situation they have been living inside suddenly reveals itself to be something completely different from what they believed. He sat down on the nearest stool, hands on his knees, staring at the laminated card. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, and I talked to you every single day about what this place was doing, about the complaints, about Royce. He shook his head slowly. I told you about the email thing, out loud, just standing there. You did, Cedric said. Jerome looked at the ceiling, then back at the card. And you were? Yes, Cedric said. Jerome was quiet for a moment, then, I really did say the thing about how if the owner ever walked in here, we'd all be in a different situation. You did, you were right. Jerome looked at Imani. Imani looked at Jerome. Between them moved something that was not quite comedy and not quite grief. The particular feeling of having been correct about a thing for so long that confirmation arrives with a weight that humor and relief have to share the carrying of. Jerome straightened on the stool. He retied his apron. He said in the careful voice of a man arriving at a conclusion that feels important to state out loud. Okay, then what do we do now? From his phone, the corporate phone, now fully powered on, now receiving the compressed weight of 3 weeks of unread executive correspondence, Cedric was reading the email filter log that his IT security head had compiled and transmitted at 11:47 the previous evening. He did not read it quietly. He read it aloud, his voice low and even, the way a person reads a document they want other people to understand as data rather than as drama. Filter rule number 1, he said, active since January 14th. Rule name, temp complaints, East Div. Trigger, any incoming message to the executive team aliases, CEO, COO, VP operations, containing the following keywords in subject or body: Tallahassee, East Division, complaint, accessibility, bias. Action on trigger, auto redirect to folder East Div archive. Folder, unmonitored. Messages in folder as of the log date, 147. He looked up. Imani had not moved. Jerome had stopped tying his apron. 147 emails, Cedric said. 14 months, routed directly away from anyone who could act on them. He set the phone face down on the counter. This was not an accident. A filter rule requires someone to write it and someone to approve it. This one was written at the divisional level. That is in the log. He picked up Imani's folder again. The email you documented, he said, anything that touches protected class language goes to me first. Do not enter it in the system. That is not informal guidance. That is instruction. And the fact that it was put in writing, even briefly, even in an internal message, means it exists. He closed the folder. Daisy had appeared in the doorway from the back. She had heard enough. Her face showed the particular expression of a person watching a structure they have been living inside suddenly become visible from the outside. The relief and the vertigo arriving at the same moment. I need to make some calls, Cedric said. I need this store to open normally. I need the staff to work their shifts normally. No one calls Royce. No one calls Simone. No one calls Felix or Nadine. If any of them call the store, Daisy, you say there are no issues and the day is running on schedule. Daisy nodded. And Imani, he said, I'm going to need a signed statement from you. Not today. Through proper process with documentation. The folder you gave me, do you have copies? I have everything backed up, she said, on a personal drive at home. Good, he looked at her directly. You did something difficult. You held on to this when you didn't know if anyone would ever see it. I want you to know it's going to be seen. Imani held his gaze. She had spent 4 years in this store, 4 years watching things disappear, 4 years writing dates and descriptions in a notebook she carried against the persistent possibility that someday it would matter. She had not known when she started writing whether she believed that possibility or just needed it. She believed it now. "One more thing," Jerome said, from where he had been standing quietly near the bag hooks. "The email filter. Who wrote it?" Cedric looked at the phone log again. The rule was written under a system access credential registered to the divisional compliance account, he said. "That credential belongs to Felix Aldridge." Jerome absorbed this. "And approved?" he said. "Approval requires a second credential at or above the regional director level," Cedric said. He did not say the second name. He did not need to. The espresso machine cycled again. The front door chimed. First customer of the morning, coming in for the early rush, unaware that the room they were entering had shifted on its axis somewhere in the last 15 minutes. Cedric reached into his bag one more time. He pulled out the pocket notebook, the dark blue one with graph paper, the one he had been carrying for 3 weeks. He set it on the counter next to the folder, next to the corporate ID card, next to the phone with the filter log. He looked at all of it. Then he looked at the espresso machine, still running at 93 degrees, still 1 degree above spec, the accumulated consequence of something small that nobody had corrected for long enough that it had stopped registering as wrong. "Let's open the store," he said. Jerome's questions sat in the air between the three of them. Imani behind the counter, Cedric with the folder in his hands, Daisy watching from the doorway like someone who had just realized the floor she was standing on was not the floor she had thought it was. Outside, the morning was brightening. In 40 minutes, the first rush would arrive. Customers would order their drinks, pay, leave, and never know what this room had contained at 7:51 a.m. on a Thursday in late October. Cedric answered Jerome's question the same way he had always answered questions that mattered. Directly, without theater. "We document everything we have," he said. "We document it correctly, with chain of custody, with date and source. Then I make 2 calls. The first goes to our general counsel's office. The second goes to someone outside the company." Imani said, "Outside meaning what?" "The Florida Commission on Human Relations," he said. "If the email filter was used to suppress complaints from employees about protected class treatment, which is what that partial email suggests, that is a potential violation of Florida Statute 448-102. The same statute on your cabinet posting. That is not an internal matter. That is a regulatory matter." Daisy stepped fully into the room. She was not a person given to dramatic gestures, but she closed the door behind her with a deliberateness that said she had made a decision about which side she was standing on, and it was this one. "If I give a statement," she said quietly, "I need to know it doesn't disappear the same way the complaint forms did." Cedric looked at her. "I'll put that in writing before I leave this building today." She nodded. Once. The kind of nod that carries the weight of everything that led up to it. The store opened at 8 a.m. on schedule, as Cedric had asked. Imani worked the bar. Jerome ran the register. Daisy managed the floor. They moved through the morning rush with the practiced rhythm of people who had been doing this work long enough that the body continues even when the mind is somewhere else entirely. The customers got their drinks. The line moved. The espresso machine ran at 93 degrees, 1 above spec, the way it always had, because some things do not fix themselves simply because someone has finally noticed them. Cedric sat at the corner table near the window, the corporate phone on the table in front of him, and the folder open beside it. He worked quietly, methodically, the way he had always worked, not fast because fast produces errors, but with the steady, unhurried momentum of a person who knows what needs doing and has decided to do it. He called his general counsel's office at 8:12. He gave a preliminary account. He used precise language, complaint suppression, automated email filter, documented directive not to log protected class complaints, physical contact by a managerial employee. His general counsel, a woman named Petra Wills, who had worked with Cedric for 11 years, and who was, in his experience, exactly the right kind of lawyer for exactly this kind of moment, said very little and wrote everything down. She would have a preliminary legal assessment to him by noon. He called his head of compliance next. He asked for a full audit of the Crestline Ops complaint log for the Tallahassee East Division, going back 18 months, cross-referenced against the customer satisfaction survey data from the same period. He wanted the discrepancy quantified, not estimated, quantified to the entry. He ended both calls before 8:40. Then he sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table, looking at the street outside, the ordinary Thursday morning continuing in its ordinary way. He thought about the number 0, the one he had sat with 3 weeks ago in a conference room 31 floors above Atlanta. He thought about what 0 had cost, not in revenue, not in brand equity, though it had cost both, but in the specific accumulated weight of 147 emails that had gone into a folder called East Div Archive and stayed there unread. 147 people who had taken the time to write, to name a problem, to reach toward a system they believed was supposed to receive them. And the system had silently, automatically turned them away. He was still thinking about that when Royce Dunbar walked in. Royce did not know, yet. That was the thing that made the next few minutes feel the way they felt. Not like confrontation, but like the last moments before weather that has already been decided, moving through the motions of normalcy because the motions have not caught up with the storm yet. He came in at 9:15, his standard time for a mid-morning check. He walked the floor with the same proprietary ease he always projected. He looked at Daisy, who looked back at him with the specific blankness of someone performing normalcy at significant personal cost. He looked at Imani, who did not look at him at all, which was unusual enough that something shifted in his expression, a faint tightening, a question beginning to form. Then he saw Cedric at the corner table, not Cal, not the new temp in the green apron, a man in a gray shirt with a corporate phone, a folder, and the particular stillness of someone who is done performing. Royce crossed the room. He stopped at the edge of the table and looked down at the corporate ID card that Cedric had left face up since that morning. His eyes moved across the name, the title block, the photo that matched the face now looking up at him from the chair. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was the specific silence of a system encountering something it was not built to process. Royce's face did not collapse, did not go pale. It did something quieter and more honest. It went still. The stillness of a person who has just understood that the ground they were standing on was not the ground they thought they knew. Cedric said, "Sit down, Royce." Not a suggestion, not a threat. The tone of a man who had been running something for 22 years and had not stopped running it simply because he was wearing an apron. Royce sat. Cedric opened the folder. He did not begin with Royce's discomfort because Royce's discomfort was not the point. He began with the documents. Email dated March 4th, he said, reading from the partial screenshot, from S. Larue to R. Dunbar. Subject line, complaint volume, keep it clean. Body partial, anything that touches protected class language goes to me first. Do not enter it in the system. He looked up. I have the full email. My IT team pulled it from the server archive this morning. The full body includes a specific instruction about protected class complaint language and a notation that this directive was to be communicated verbally to shift leads, but not documented in writing. A pause. You communicated it verbally to Daisy Mercer. She has agreed to provide a written statement. Royce said nothing. The complaint log shows 18 entries in 14 months, Cedric continued. The discrepancy between that number and the actual complaint volume, which my compliance team is now quantifying, will form the basis of an internal audit report. That report will be shared with the Florida Commission on Human Relations as part of a voluntary disclosure filing. He closed the folder. Voluntary disclosure means we go to them before they come to us. That carries significant procedural weight when the commission determines next steps. Royce found his voice. It came out smaller than it had ever sounded in this building. I was following direction. I know, Cedric said. That's in the documentation too. Simone Larue received a call from Petra Wills at 10:47 that morning. She was in her car between Tallahassee and Pensacola when her phone rang, and the name on the screen registered as significant before the call had even connected. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Cedric was not on it. Petra was precise, thorough, and deliberately unsurprising. She outlined what had been found, what was being filed, and what Simone's procedural options were going forward. She said, at the end, that Simone was entitled to retain personal legal counsel before responding to any formal inquiry, and that the company's legal team was not her legal team, and that this distinction mattered. Simone pulled into a parking lot. She sat for a while, then she called Raymond Holt. Raymond Holt listened as Simone described, in the compressed language of someone who understood they were possibly being recorded, the broad shape of what was unfolding. He said very little. His pauses were the kind that contained calculation rather than consideration. When he finally spoke, he said, "This is going to be managed," which was the wrong thing to say, and both of them, somewhere under the calculations, probably understood that. But institutional reflexes are powerful. They survive past the moment they become useless. The internal disciplinary hearing convened 6 weeks later, in the third week of December, in Crestline's headquarters conference room on the 31st floor. Cedric had requested that it be recorded in full and that a summary be made available to all Tallahassee East staff who had been named or had provided statements. That request was documented in the agenda distributed by Petra Wills. The hearing was not a trial. It had no jury, no courtroom rules of evidence. What it had was a 3-person panel, an independent HR consultant, a member of the board's audit committee, and Isaiah Pruitt from the Florida Commission on Human Relations, present as an observer, and 41 pages of findings prepared over 6 weeks by the internal audit team and cross-checked by outside labor counsel. Royce Dunbar appeared before the panel on a Wednesday morning. He had retained a labor attorney who had advised him, correctly, to say as little as possible. He said very little. His attorney entered a written response that acknowledged supervisory responsibility for complaint handling, while noting that Royce had received explicit direction from regional management and had no authority to override it unilaterally. Legally careful, factually accurate on its specific points. Felix Aldridge appeared on Thursday. He had not retained outside counsel, either confidence or poor judgment, and the distinction became clear approximately 12 minutes in when the panel asked him to explain the email filter rule bearing his system credential. He said he had set it up at a supervisor's direction and had believed it was intended to route complaints through proper channels rather than suppress them. He cited the same supervisor Royce had cited. When asked whether he had ever verified that the folder the filter routed to was monitored, he said he had not. When asked whether he had ever followed up on any of the 147 messages now sitting in the East Div archive, he said he had not. The panel asked whether he considered that a failure of his compliance responsibilities. Felix was quiet for a moment. Then, in retrospect, yes. Simone Larue's appearance was scheduled for the following Monday. She arrived with a personal attorney who entered a written statement on her behalf and requested that her testimony be deferred pending review of the audit materials. The panel granted a 1-week deferral. The following Friday afternoon, Simone submitted a resignation letter through her attorney, effective immediately, citing personal and professional reasons. The letter contained no admission of wrongdoing. Its language was so carefully constructed that the care itself was nearly transparent. The panel noted the resignation in the hearing record. It did not change the findings. Raymond Holt appeared before the board's audit committee, a separate proceeding, not the disciplinary hearing, and argued with the measured authority of a man who had been making arguments in rooms like this one for 30 years, that the compliance failures were operational in nature and did not reflect board-level knowledge or endorsement. He was composed. He cited the structural separation between governance and operations with the fluency of someone who had been citing it for years, in context where the citation had always worked. He pointed out that divisional management had both the authority and the obligation to handle complaint protocols without board oversight, and that the board's responsibility was to act on findings once presented, which, he noted, was precisely what this meeting represented. The committee's outside counsel let him finish. Then she noted, for the record, that the email filter's systematic suppression of protected class complaints created potential regulatory exposure under Florida Statute 448.102, regardless of the level at which the original direction originated, and that this exposure attached to the company, and therefore to its board, through basic principles of fiduciary duty. She noted further that the voluntary disclosure to the Florida Commission, while procedurally beneficial, was not a substitute for governance action. The board needed to demonstrate, in concrete and documented form, that the failures had been identified, addressed, and structurally prevented from recurring. Raymond Holt did not resign. He remained on the board, but the committee voted 4-1, Raymond's being the one, to accept audit recommendations that included mandatory independent complaint logging that bypassed regional management, quarterly reporting directly to the audit committee, and a 6-month formal review by the Florida Commission on Human Relations. His dissenting vote was noted in the committee records, which were publicly available to shareholders at the next filing cycle. Nadine Cross had submitted her resignation before any of the hearings began. Her email arrived at 5:47 a.m. on the morning after Cedric had revealed his identity in the store, 3 hours before Petra Wills placed her first call to any party in the chain. 7 words: effective immediately. Please process my final check. Which meant someone had told her the night before. Which meant there was a conversation somewhere that Cedric's team had not yet located. Isaiah Pruitt's Observer report noted the anomaly with careful precision. Source of advance notification to N. Cross prior to corporate action not established. Email marked redacted, received by this office from an unverified sender on the date in question. Contents encrypted. Decryption ongoing as of filing date. The encrypted email remained undeciphered. Daisy Mercer gave her written statement in November, 14 pages, in a room at the Atlanta offices with Petra Wills and an independent labor counsel present. It documented 3 years of complaint handling as she had understood and practiced it, the verbal directive she had received from Royce in her first month as shift lead, and the specific Friday afternoon she had watched him fold a comment card and carry it to the back. She did not appear before the panel in person. Her statement was entered as documentary evidence, and her name appeared in the findings under corroborating testimony, third party. After submitting the statement, she drove back to Tallahassee and worked the closing shift. She restocked the cup sleeves. She calibrated the espresso machine. A technician had finally corrected it to 91 degrees, and wiped down the bar in long, even strokes. She wrote in the shift log the way she had always written in the shift log, except now the log was going somewhere, being read by someone with the authority to act on what it contained. At the end of the shift, she sat in the back office and allowed herself to be tired in a way she had not permitted herself in a very long time. The promotion offer arrived the following week, in a letter on Crestline letterhead signed by Cedric Okafor, District Operations Lead, Tallahassee Corridor. She left it on her kitchen table for 4 days before calling to accept. Jerome had worked the morning shift on the day Cedric sat at the corner table and made his calls. He had watched from the bar, with the practiced invisibility of a person who has learned that the best way to observe something is to appear not to be doing so, as Royce sat across from Cedric and the conversation happened. He could not hear the words. He could read the shape of them in the set of Royce's shoulders and the steady pace of Cedric's voice. When Royce left the store 20 minutes later, no floor check, no coffee, nothing said to anyone, Jerome watched him through the front window until the car turned the corner and was gone. Then he turned back to the bar and pulled a double shot at the correct temperature for the first time. Let it run its full 26 seconds. Tasted it, he said, to no one in particular. That's what it's supposed to taste like. His formal statement to the audit team ran to 6 pages. Detailed, corroborated by other testimony, temporally consistent with documentary evidence. 3 months after the hearing, he accepted a shift lead position at a location 2 miles north. He asked 2 people whose judgment he trusted, thought about it for a week, and took it. Imani did not take the promotion. She thought about it across several days, turning it in her mind the way she turned facts she was not yet sure she understood. The offer was real. The role was meaningful. The location, the same store, elevated, felt both right and complicated in ways she found difficult to separate. What she wrote in the email to Cedric's office was, "I'm grateful for the offer. I want to stay on the floor at this location for now. Not because I don't trust the change, because I want to see whether it holds." Cedric read it on a Tuesday morning in the same conference room where he had first looked at the number 0. He read it twice. Then he wrote back one sentence. "That's the right reason. The offer stands whenever you're ready." He meant it. He also understood, in the way that people who have built things understand what they have built, that Imani's answer was not distrust. It was the appropriate response to a system that had failed her for 4 years. You do not begin trusting a system again because someone tells you to. You watch it. You document it. You give it time to show, through its behavior, not its announcements, whether anything has actually changed. He had built the complaint log requirement because he believed in that principle. He had spent 3 weeks in an apron in Tallahassee because the log had stopped working, and he had needed to understand why from the inside, the way things can only truly be understood when you are inside them. He had not fixed everything. He had not expected to. What he had done was this. He had created the conditions under which fixing became possible. Whether the fixing actually held, whether the new protocols survived the next quarter, whether the commission's review produced durable oversight, whether the culture of the East Division became one that treated a complaint as signal rather than friction, that would take months to determine, years more accurately. Imani understood that. It was why she was staying on the floor. The disciplinary hearing's final findings were issued on a Friday in January, 14 weeks after Cedric had first walked into the store on a Monday morning and tied on a green apron. Royce Dunbar, suspended without pay for 60 days, pending completion of a mandatory workplace conduct review, returned to any managerial role contingent on panel clearance. His representation had negotiated the outcome down from termination over 3 weeks. The settlement documented but not disclosed. Felix Aldridge, written reprimand formally entered in his personnel file. Required to complete additional compliance training. Retained his position with a note that the outcome was subject to review if additional evidence of independent knowledge emerged. Simone Larue, resignation accepted. No severance beyond statutory entitlement. The panel's findings specifically noted that the March 4th email constituted evidence of deliberate directive to suppress protected class complaints, and that this finding was referred to the Florida Commission on Human Relations for independent determination of whether it violated Florida Statute 448.102. Timeline for the Commission's review, 3 to 6 months. Raymond Holt. No findings against individual board members in the disciplinary proceeding. Governance recommendations accepted by the Audit Committee, 4-1. Nadine Cross. Resigned prior to proceedings. Non-cooperation noted. The encrypted email addressed to Isaiah Pruitt's office remained undeciphered as of the filing date. The Commission's Observer Report carried a phrase in its final paragraph that resolved nothing and was clearly intended to resolve nothing because the situation it described had not yet resolved. One or more individuals with knowledge of the investigation's scope may not have been identified in the current proceedings. may not have been identified. The phrase sat at the bottom of page 41 like a weight placed there deliberately and left. On the last Friday in January, Cedric drove back to Tallahassee. He told no one. He parked 2 blocks from the store, walked in through the front door at 7:50 a.m., and joined the end of the morning line. The store was running. The bar was staffed. The espresso machine hummed at the correct temperature. The floor was clean. The complaint log, now feeding directly to a monitored divisional inbox that bypassed regional management entirely, per the new protocol, showed 11 entries for the month of January. 11 real entries from 11 real customers, each one time-stamped, each one categorized, each one with a resolution field that was actually being filled in. He ordered a flat white. Imani made it. She recognized him immediately and said nothing about who he was. Nothing that would mark the moment as different from any other customer transaction, because that was the right instinct, and she had always had good instincts. She made the drink with the correct temperature, the correct extraction time, handed it across the bar with the specific attentiveness of a person who takes the work seriously because the work is worth taking seriously. He paid. He tipped. He sat at the corner table and drank the coffee. It tasted the way it was supposed to taste. He sat there for a while. The morning rush moved around him the way water moves around something that has learned to hold still. Not fighting the current, not going with it, just present in it. He thought about what had changed and what had not, and what the difference between those two categories would look like in 6 months, in a year, in 5. His phone buzzed, a number he did not recognize. He looked at it for a moment, then picked up. 3 seconds of quiet on the line. Not dead air, a pause that had a shape to it, the shape of a decision being made on the other end. Then the call ended. He set the phone down, looked at the screen, then looked across the room at Imani, who was already moving on to the next drink, the next customer, the next moment in the morning's particular rhythm. At the edge of the corner table, beside the flat white, sat a small dark green notebook he had not noticed when he sat down. No name on the cover. He picked it up and opened to the first page. Blank except for one line at the very top, in careful block print. "We are still watching, just so you know." And beneath it, the number 11, the number of entries in the complaint log that month, underlined twice. No signature. He closed the notebook. He held it for a moment. He set it back on the table, exactly where it had been, and picked up his coffee. Outside, Friday was moving through its ordinary paces. The street, the light, the store running at the correct temperature. 11 entries in a monitored inbox. One encrypted email still unread. One 3-second call that had answered nothing. He finished the coffee. He left the notebook on the table. He did not know who had left it there. He did not know whether the 3-second call and the notebook were connected, whether they came from the same hand, whether they were a message of warning or of quiet solidarity. He did not know whether the encrypted email Nadine Cross had received the night before he revealed himself had come from inside the company or outside it, from someone who wanted to protect her or someone who wanted to use her, from a thread that had already ended or one that was still running, somewhere beneath the visible surface of things. What he knew was this: 11 entries, the correct temperature, a floor that opened at 8 a.m. and ran on schedule. Imani Voss still at the bar, watching whether the system held. Some answers were enough. Some answers would have to wait. And somewhere in an office at the Florida Commission on Human Relations, an encrypted email sat in a queue, still waiting for someone with the right key. Here is what this story leaves behind. Not every system is broken by a villain in a spotlight. Most systems are broken quietly, by the filter rule nobody questions, the form nobody files, the folder nobody opens, by the slow daily choice to let a complaint disappear because recording it is inconvenient and ignoring it is safe. Cedric Okafor did not fix Crestline Coffee by firing everyone in the room. He fixed it the only way anything broken can be fixed, by walking into the middle of it, staying long enough to understand how the damage worked, and then documenting exactly what he found, one entry at a time. Imani Voss kept a notebook for 4 years because she believed, without any proof, that someone would eventually care enough to read it. She was right. And that matters more than the disciplinary findings, more than the suspended managers, more than the policy documents currently sitting in a monitored inbox. It matters because it means that the most ordinary act, writing something down, holding on to it, refusing to let it disappear, can be the thing that changes everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is the reason to.